The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, here we are in the dead of morning, and it may be that there's only about 5 New Zealanders outside the people in this chamber listening to this debate, but for the record, that is deliberate on the part of this government. An interesting thing, colleagues, is that this debate was originally to be scheduled by the government at the start of the urgency motion. And at the last minute, the order was changed because some genius in the government whip's office worked out the truth, which is, if the public hears this debate, they will work out one of the most monumental lies in political history, which is the government has staked its political reputation on getting back to surplus. How often have we heard that? We're going to get back to surplus. We're going to get the government's books in the black. Well, the colossal lie about this budget is that there is no surplus. Wafer thin, they called it, $75 million in 2014 off a budget of $84 billion, a margin of 1/1000th of the total spend. And you know what? By a rough back-of-the-envelope calculation, I'm going to point to $3 billion worth of porkies, bull dust and blither that gets them to that line. $3 billion. And here's the list. Now, we're here to talk about the excise bill, Mr Speaker, and this excise bill puts petrol taxes up for hard-pressed New Zealand families by 9 cents a litre. That's 9 cents a litre that ordinary Kiwis can barely afford, and that rakes in, wait for it, $7 billion extra dollars over 10 years. $7 billion out of Kiwis' pockets to try to help them balance their bogus budget. But you see, it doesn't get there without a whole lot of other things. On ACC, officials told the government to give back to hard-working New Zealanders $700 million of overcharges in 2014-15. Did they do it? No, they're not doing it. They put it off to the following year, and they're banking the $700 million of New Zealanders' money so that they can get their wafer-thin bogus budget over the line. And it doesn't get there without cutting the forecast expenditure track by $200 million in that year. It doesn't get there without an extraordinary bunch of tax fiddles. And I want to just draw the House's attention. This is a worthy document. It's called the Budget Economic and Financial Update, or the BEFU. Lovely name. And on page 30 of it are the tax flow assumptions. Guess what happens in the forecast 2014 year? A magic $400 million of tax credits occurs out of nowhere for that year only. $400 million is magicked as if by fairy dust. $1.1 billion of extra corporate tax magics its way into the budget for that year only before falling to $200 million the year after. And $1.1 billion of extra PAYE and employee tax falls from the sky in that year only before falling away again. It's an extraordinary conjuring trick. This budget is not worth the paper it is printed on. There is no surplus. There is no surplus. What there is $3 billion worth of bogus numbers that are a conjuring trick that this government should be ashamed of, Mr Speaker. The budget doesn't get there, for example, without promising business R&D tax cuts. Well, that's playing catch-up with Labor. We promised that last election. We costed ours. From memory, it was about $300 million. The government's put it in the budget, but there's nothing in the books. Not 1 cent in the forward expenditure track for their R&D tax cut promise. Not 1 cent. Mr Dunn, a couple of weeks ago, announced $1.5 billion for the R&D computer. I don't know how you spend $1.5 billion on a computer system, but guess what? Not $1 is in this budget for $1 billion computer system. Not $1, colleagues. This budget is a sham. There is no surplus, Mr. Speaker, because in about 7 minutes I've been able to reel off over $3 billion worth of porkies. $3 billion worth of porkies, misprints, favourable assumptions, money spreading, and those backbenchers didn't get told that in caucus. You can bet that. The lambs to the slaughter of the National Party and a very large shepherd right out in front. Mr. Speaker, let's just suppose the budget did balance. Let's just suppose it really did get into the black. Would that be the be-all and end-all for New Zealanders? Would that make 1 million flowers bloom? Would that get 270,000 children out of poverty? Would that get our inflation rate down? Would that get our unemployment rate down? The answer is no, Mr. Speaker. Because guess what? Nobody's told Bill English. It's not just his job to balance the government's books. It is to balance the country's books. These people are balancing their books at the expense of your books, New Zealanders. Not you, Mr. Speaker, their books. The government is taking money out of the wallets of Kiwis, putting it in the Treasury coffers, calling it a surplus when it is not. When it is not. And Brooke Saban's been having dreams. I wonder what kind of dreams. Mike Saban, sorry. He's almost as good looking as the sun, but not quite. But we wonder, all I'm hoping is that it proves that there's enough synapses between his ears to actually fire up and create a dream, and that's very good. But Mr. Speaker, coming back to the point, if this budget did balance, and if the government had a strategy to grow the economy, which they don't, then we would still be left with a third question. Are they putting people first? Does this economy serve New Zealanders, or do they see New Zealanders as pawns and peons to serve a magic economy? They've got it the wrong way round. You know, they trumpeted this budget as a social equity budget. How ironic is that? They said, this won't be a typical dry National Party budget. We're going to have food in schools. We're going to have a landlord, rental, retail warrant of fitness. And do you know what? Absolute window dressing, New Zealanders. Absolute window dressing. This budget is as dry as dust. It is a miserly, mingy budget. It is a visionless bore. But the key point today is to remember that there is no surplus. This is a bogus document. It has got $3 billion worth of sham, worth of lost money, worth of what we can only call porkies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill adds 9 cents to ordinary New Zealanders' petrol bills for every litre that they use over 3 years. It is part of a series of measures which try to get these clowns to balance their books at the expense of New Zealanders' books. The saddest part about it is after all that they are putting New Zealanders through, they still don't get there. They have to claw away $200 million of expenditure from next year. They have to magic up $4.1 billion of extra tax flows. They have to hold back $700 million of ACC levies that belong to New Zealanders. They have to penny pinch, lie and scrounge, and they still don't get there. This is a sham. It's a bogus budget. It's a budget to be ashamed of. And when those backbenchers go and have a thumb through it, of course they never will, because they probably can't read at that level of detail, but if they ever did, Mr. Speaker, David Bennett is happy in his ignorance. You've got to give him that. He is. Some people are ignorant and miserable. David Bennett is happy to be ignorant. He knows he's ignorant. It's like Chris Ockenvold, right? Here's a man happy in his work. He knows the budget is a waste of time. He knows,
Point of order.
I think the member was using the wrong surname. Were you meant to David Shearer?
Order. Order. That is not a point of order and will lead to disorder. David, Honourable David.
That one has hair. That one has hair. Oh. He's a sensitive flower. Mr. Speaker, the reason that we are here on the dead of morning on a Saturday sharing a few jokes amongst colleagues is because this is the debate the government doesn't want the public to hear. They don't want a broad budget debate because they know it's not worth
the member's time has expired. Dr. Cam
Mr. Speaker, he was doing quite well until that ad hominem attack at the end, mate.